Hey there retro gamers, this is Andy C from Pieces of 8-Bit. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking you through my top 10 tips for playing retro games in 2024. There are a number of different ways of doing it. Some you may already be familiar with, some you won't, and there may be some nuances in between as well. It's not a countdown, just 10 top tips. So please do sit back, relax, enjoy the video. If you love these videos or enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe as I always ask. Yeah, hope you enjoy this. Hope this gives you some good ideas. Let's dive straight in. So, in at number 10, despite it not being a countdown, this is neither my least favourite nor my best option, is new consoles playing old games. So this is something you're probably already familiar with. If you own a very modern console, such as a PS5, you'll know that you can play PS4 games on that. But it's a bit more complicated than that. There may be some consoles out there that you didn't realise played some old games, so definitely worth a look. If you're in the PlayStation universe, then the PlayStation 3 is going to be your friend here. So if you happen to own a PlayStation 3, especially a launch one, which was called the Spider-Man PlayStation or the Fat PlayStation, then you will already have PlayStation 2 compatibility built in. In Japan, where it was launched, in fact, on the Japanese market, the PlayStation 3 actually had the PlayStation 2 hardware in it. In the European launch and the US launch, the PS3 had an emulator, and there is a backward compatibility list which talks about all the PS2 games you can play. It will also natively play PlayStation 1 games, and all of the PlayStations, as far as I'm aware at least, PlayStation 3s will play PS1 games. So a tip with the PlayStation 3 Slim and the Ultra Slim is there are some workarounds which basically enable that emulation for PS2. So I will put a link in the description to the backwards compatibility list for that, and I will be doing another video in the future to show you how to get your PS3 working. Needless to say, there are a couple of changes. One's called Hen, which you can go and have a look for, and the other is a custom firmware update, neither of which cause any long-term damage to your PS3, so don't worry too much about that. Lots of guidance on the web for how to get that set up. On the Xbox, it's a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. I don't know a huge amount about Xboxes, but I know that there is a good amount of backward compatibility. I know the Xbox Series S and X will play Xbox One, Xbox 360 and original Xbox games. I believe there are certain backward compatibility issues with some games, but as far as I'm aware, Xbox compatibility is good, but it's various and depends on the generation as to what backward compatibility there is. But certainly if you've got an Xbox, or you have an Xbox from a previous generation, there is a good chance that you will be able to play some older Xbox games on there. One of my favourite ones, and one that I don't know if a lot of people necessarily know this, but if you happen to own an older version of the Wii, so one of the early versions of the Wii, that will accept GameCube discs. So if you happen to have some old GameCube discs knocking around, and you have an old Wii sitting around that's not doing anything, worth a check. And in fact, there is a little flap on the top of the Wii which will allow you to plug in a old GameCube controller, and in fact I actually have Wind Waker. It's the only game I've got left from my original GameCube that I can play on the Wii, which is fantastic. In the portable market, the Game Boy Advanced would play old Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and the DS will play Game Boy Advance games. So there are lots of platforms out there which will play backwards and forwards. Some consoles, such as the Wii, are quite cheap to get hold of. Obviously saves you going out and sourcing a GameCube, which will actually probably at this point be slightly more expensive. And obviously bear in mind, for newer consoles, already mentioned about the Xbox, PlayStation 5 will play most, if not all, PlayStation 4 games, and it'll run them in a slightly less chaotic fashion than my old PS4, which sounds like a Chinook taking off when I get some games running on it. So there are your options for new consoles to play your old games. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so number 9 in my list is old consoles, new tech. So Many of you will have some older consoles. Some of you might have a PlayStation 2 knocking around. Some of you might have a Nintendo 64 knocking around. Some of you might even have a Wii, as mentioned in the previous one. And if you happen to own a brand new television with, even from the sort of the last 10 years or so, you'll notice that you only have HDMI connections. You may have already given up. You may have already decided that those consoles need to be sold on or are sitting in your attic doing nothing, gathering dust. That's a real shame. There are options. One of the things that you can have a look at doing is a analog to digital conversion. So essentially, the technology in those older consoles would have been SCART or RCA, S-Video, those kind of things. Very few of those standards are supported now in modern televisions. You almost uniquely see HDMI. So there are some devices that you can buy. This is very much an example of you get what you pay for. So when I started out on this journey, I decided to pick up a relatively cheap, it was about £6 on Amazon, analog to digital converter that would allow me to plug in my retro consoles to be able to do my recordings for my videos and also play them on my modern LG television. Now, as you might imagine, £6 for an analog to digital converter, you're going to get what you pay for. So that's what this thing looks like here. You'll see loads of these on Amazon. They're okay. They do the job, but ultimately the quality is pretty poor. So, if you really want to get started and you don't have a lot of money to spend, then this is the way to go. So I decided after that I wanted to get something a little bit more substantial. So I had a look around, did a bit of a review, a scope out, and I found this one. So this was about £30, and it is better. It has S-Video support, and it has got a couple of options on the back here for adjusting from 720 to 1080. Although I think actually, if I remember rightly, yes, this one does have 720 to 1080 as well, though the difference seemed to be pretty negligible. This one is powered by its own power supply, and as I say, it has S-Video support as well, which is slightly better quality. So if you can get S-Video out, you'll get a better result with this one. So that was about £30. Still not really exactly what I wanted. There is something called the Retro-sect, which you can buy, which I don't own, and they are quite expensive. That seems to be the gold standard for analog to digital conversion. But there is something called the Retro-scaler, which is what I've just recently bought. I bought this from a company in Tewkesbury, which I'll put the link to, a company called Retro-sect. But you can equally buy these on eBay and Amazon for about £65. And these are basically a Chinese version of the Retro-sect, so a significantly cheaper version. These have the RGB ports, they have the RCA ports, they have the S-Video, they do some smoothing on the videos as well. And I found this to be pretty good. I mean, it's not perfect, and certainly as a comparison, when I looked at SSX 3 running on my PlayStation 3 using one of the mods that I mentioned before, and I was getting sort of crystal clear graphics on there. When I run SSX 3 through this, it was good, but clearly not as good as it would have been when it was sort of running natively through the SCART. Of course, the other option here is to go and find yourself a CRT TV, but obviously that's going to take up space, and they are increasingly expensive and difficult to find now, and obviously there's the issue of reliability with that older tech. So those analog to digital converters, definitely recommend a look. Definitely would recommend spending the money to get something a little bit better. I say the cheap ones will get you going, but certainly when I played that on the N64, it got the N64 working on my television, but the quality was pretty bad. I think the newer consoles, some sort of PS2 era, Wii, those kind of things, you will get better results anyway. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so at number 8, this is a relatively short one. this might seem like a really obvious thing, but to be honest with you, I didn't know that this was necessarily an option for me until recently. You can just buy the remastered version or the original versions actually online quite often. So I am going to do a chat on abandonware and some of the things to be aware of on that later on. Abandonware is very much a grey area, but there is a lot of good content on there. Ultimately, some of it, the whole concept of it being out of copyright is a little bit sketchy. So you know, if you want to legitimately go and pick up some old games, you can go and buy them, and quite often they will be relatively cheap. Sometimes there'll be a remastered version, sometimes there will be the original version. If you go to GOG.com or Steam.com, you can quite often find games there. So I've managed to pick up Impossible Mission, I managed to pick up Theme Park, which I'll be doing later on. And the nice thing about those is quite often they'll be ready to run as soon as you download them on your PC or your Macintosh. So that is a good shout. For quite often what is a few pounds, you can go and buy these games from those stores. Quite often as well, if you happen to have an iPad or other pad device or Android device, you can quite often buy some of these games on their app stores as well. So definitely go and have a look if you want to just own the game and just play it on your PC. Go check it out. Okay, so next up we have buy new hardware. This might seem extreme, but there is a lot of reimagined hardware out there for you available to buy. There are loads of mini consoles and other sort of dedicated, properly licensed consoles. So I've got a selection here. Got the lovingly recreated Commodore 64. Really, really nice little bit of equipment here. With the latest versions of this, you can plug in a USB stick on the side and sideload some other games as well, which is really great. There's the mini NES. Obviously a beautiful recreation of the original sort of Nintendo console from the 80s, the early 80s. There is the Amiga 500. I think this is probably my favourite. Looks like the Amiga, obviously significantly smaller than the unit you will know and love, but beautifully recreated. Again, as with the Commodore 64, this one allows you to sideload games, and if you own the games, you can pop them onto a USB stick and pop those on, and they work really, really well on here. So you can revisit some of those games that you really loved. In fact, the Moonstone review that you may have seen earlier in my series, that was played on this Amiga Mini 500, A500 I should say. Got PlayStation 1. This one, not so keen on. This is quite limited in terms of the game selection. There's a few good things on here, but to be honest with you, if you own the PlayStation 1 games already, then you can play those on a PS2 if you've got one, and on a PS3 if you've got one. So only really worth getting just for nostalgia, really, more than anything else. I'm quite keen to actually pick up one thing I don't own is a PlayStation 1. It's the only PlayStation of the series that I don't own. In fact, I would quite like just to pick up an original and just play on that, actually. There are others. There's the Mega Drive, the SNES. I think there's a PC Engine Mini as well. So if those sort of things float your boat, have a look at the game selection and try those out. But they are really beautiful recreations. So that's one way to do it. They're relatively inexpensive, although they do vary wildly depending on whether they're still in production or not. The other option is to go for something like this. So this is the Evercade. These are amazing little bits of equipment. This essentially is a cartridge-based platform. It's a completely modern piece of equipment. You can buy there's a newer version of the handheld, and there is also a sort of TV console that you can plug in as well. And then later on this year, they are releasing a new one, which looks really cool, which is a black one with sort of kind of cyan LEDs on it, which is really lovely. That's the VSR, I think it is, that's coming out. So the VS is the standalone one that you can plug into your television. Really, really good. What's lovely about these is they're all cartridge based. So you buy the cartridges. This is the Namco one. So this has got Pac-Man, Dig Dug, a few other games on there. The version of this that I bought is the premium pack, which comes with the Namco, Atari, and something else which I can't remember, but it basically comes with about, I think it's like 20 or 30 different games on it. And the nice thing about the cartridges on here is they work on all of the Evercade platforms. So if you have the desktop version, sorry, the TV version, it will work with that, and that one comes with 2 controllers as well. And it's very sort of 1980s kind of Famicom styling, which is really, really cool. You can kind of see how it's inspired on this one as well. So this is a really, really good option if you want to play retro games. Lots of cartridges available. Some of them vary quite wildly in price. So the Oliver Twins one, incidentally, which a lot of the Oliver Twins games you can actually play free online. The Oliver Twins one, to pick up a second-hand cartridge of that, is actually quite expensive. But really great fun and portable. Nice thing about the portable ones as well is that these will also run on the television. So this is kind of best of both worlds. I can plug this in via mini HDMI into the TV. And play the games on my sort of modern television, which means that I don't necessarily need the sort of standalone TV version, although I am very tempted by the new one when it comes out in August later this year. So those are my picks for new tech reimagined. Let's see what's in the next one. Okay, so we talked about new hardware, new legitimate hardware that runs the games under license. There is another option, and this is probably one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but one way of getting you to play retro games quite cheaply. It can be a bit of a gamble, but there are a lot of games out there on something called the Game Stick. There are a number of other hardware platforms that you'll see that are a bit like a Game Boy or whatever that you can buy quite often on sites like Wish or Temu or on Amazon and eBay as well, and they boast having tens of thousands of retro games on them. I don't necessarily recommend it. I think the licensing for these platforms is a little bit suspicious, a lot suspicious, frankly. But ultimately, you know, they are a cheap and affordable way of getting to play retro games. What you also won't know is what games get included. So sometimes when you buy these platforms, you'll get a lot of games that you've never heard of before, or games that are just utterly terrible. They might show a picture of Mario or Sonic on the front, and you may well get those games included. But it's no guarantee. So you might be able to pick them up for maybe £30, £40, $50, $60. But I would definitely suggest that they're a bit of a gamble. So, you know, by all means, if you know somebody that's got one, have a look, maybe get yourself one. But probably one of my least favourite options for getting retro gaming. Let's have a look at the next one. Right, so we're halfway through our countdown already. This next section is emulation. So in emulation, basically you can, on your PC or Mac, download an emulator for an old console. There are loads of them around. They are lovingly looked after and managed by their various communities. Some, unfortunately, have sort of fallen by the wayside a bit, but most consoles, pretty much back to the Atari days, will have an emulator available for them on the web. You can download those emulators, you can install them, and you can then play what are called the ROMs on those emulators for games from that particular era of console gaming. So, good example of this, I played on the Sega Mega Drive emulator probably over 20 years ago, and I was able to play some games that I could no longer play on the Mega Drive. Such as Sonic and Knuckles, and it was a real treat to be able to go back and revisit those games using that emulator. So there are emulators for just, as I say, just about anything you want. You can download them. Obviously, from an ethical and licensing point of view, you probably ought to own the games that you're playing. As I mentioned before, you can download ROMs from abandonware. It's a bit of a grey area, but you can go find them there. There are other sites as well where you can download pretty much any ROM that you're looking for. They will all say the same thing, which is that you really should own the game before you do it. This is still a bit of a grey area, so just be a little bit cautious about what you're doing. But you know, like ultimately, it is an option to go and get those emulations. One other thing to bear in mind as well is that some of the emulators themselves actually require a license, and that's to run basically the software that runs the actual original consoles is under license as well. So a good example of that is the Amiga. For the Amiga, you need what's called a Kickstart ROM. that Kickstart ROM is actually still maintained to this day, and therefore you need a license for that. And there are sites where you can go and get that. There is a community that actually looks after the most recent versions of the Kickstart ROMs. I have an old Amiga, for instance, which is currently defunct. So if I want to run an emulator for an Amiga, I'll need to go and purchase those Kickstart ROMs to get started. I think Neo Geo is another example of that. So some of them, you'll hear them called BIOS. You'll need to go and get that BIOS software, and as I say, you may need to pay a little bit of money for those, or go find those if they're freely available, to be able to actually run your emulator. They're not distributable with that. So emulation is a really good option. You know, if you've got a PC or a Mac, a fairly modern one, you can play games, emulated games, kind of all the way up to PS2. Haven't seen any PS3 ones around, but certainly up to PS2. Most emulation works really well with 90s consoles. Some of the newer ones, such as the GameCube, can be a little bit flaky, but ultimately the older ones, Mega Drive, SNES, NES, the cartridge-based consoles, the emulators for those have been around a long time, and they're really, really good. So emulation is a really good option. Go have a look. Let's have a look at the next one. So at number 4 in my list, and I did say this wasn't a countdown yet, I seem to have started at 10 and got to 4, but let's just go with it now. I've already recorded the videos, I'm not going to do it again. So let's go for number 4. So at number 4, this is custom tech. So essentially, what we talked about in the last section was emulation. This is really kind of variation on a theme. This is still emulation ultimately, but it's using some custom hardware. So one of my favorite things to tinker with, one of my favorite things to do, one of my favorite bits of technology out there is the Raspberry Pi. You will have all have heard of the Raspberry Pi. Some of you may be a little bit nervous about how to get started with the Raspberry Pi. It's actually remarkably easy. I will be doing an intro to Raspberry Pi, quite a short one on how to get started. If you buy a Raspberry Pi, some of the things that you can do with it. There are other sort of onboard computer systems out there which will also do emulation, but Raspberry Pi running what's called RetroPie, which is the essentially a operating system, if you like, that's designed specifically for playing retro games, is absolutely fantastic. And the reason why it's so good is not only is the support for it fantastic, there's a great community out there. All of the most emulations are available through the Raspberry Pi, various supporting websites. But the great thing is that you can take a Raspberry Pi, which is just a computer on a board, and you can stick it in a whole variety of different bits of hardware. So just some examples here. So this is the I've got a Raspberry Pi 4 which sits in this here. It looks like a tiny little SNES, NES even. Raspberry Pi 4 in here. There's a little SD card in this box with the ROMs on it. Basically, you format your SD card with the RetroPie installation on it, and then you can, with a USB stick, or you can use something called a Samba Share, which is like you basically connect to it from your PC over the network and transfer games quite easily onto here. Same as before with the emulation piece, you probably should own the games from a licensing and ethical standpoint. But yeah, you can load the games on here. It's got USB support actually on the Raspberry Pi itself, and so you can buy all manner of different controllers. So I've got some little NES controllers, some SNES controllers. I've got all sorts. It take general sort of little PlayStation controllers or whatever if they're wireless ones. So the PlayStation 3 will connect via Bluetooth. PlayStation 3 controllers, that is, will connect via Bluetooth to this as well. So this is a really great fun way of playing retro games, and if you just want to sit in front of the television and play some retro games, then this is a fantastic option because it's a very small form factor, and yeah, you can just sit and play Speedball 2 or Need for Speed or Micro Machines or whatever it is you want to do with your friends. Got 4 USB ports in there, so you can have 4 controllers. So it's a really great option. Some of the other form factors you can get. So this is one of my absolute favourite things, which is the Picade. So this also has a Raspberry Pi 4 in it, and it is I've got a great reflection from my light there. But this is a fantastic piece of equipment. It comes in a beautifully presented box, and I spent a Saturday morning putting that together, and that's about that's about as happy as I can get from a retro gaming perspective, just kind of wiring in buttons, and it's got a clicky joystick, and it's fantastic. And this actually, in the summertime, I've got a little bar in my garden, and this sits out on the bar, and people come and play Outrun and various other games on there. So that's a really great thing. Quite like taking that into work as well from time to time. That's usually a big hit. So again, just a Raspberry Pi 4 in both of these different cases. And the other thing that you can also do is look at something called a GPI case. GPI case has what's called a Pi Zero in it, which is a very inexpensive computer on a board. They cost about £15, give or take. That's actually in here. It's actually in this cartridge, is the entire computer. So the rest of it, there we go, you can just sort of see here. That is the Raspberry Pi. That's actually the hat. The Raspberry Pi sort of sits underneath there, and relatively inexpensive, but an incredibly powerful little bit of hardware considering its form factor. So you can actually play old Game Boy Advance games in there. It will play most of the 90s console games, so Mega Drive, SNES, NES, all of those kind of things will also work in there. And the actual case itself, these are about £60, £50-60. This is a slightly older version. This is the GPI case 1. There is a GPI case 2 as well, which is slightly better, but that's a full colour screen that you've got in there. It's even got some disguised little shoulder buttons on the back, which are absolutely fantastic. So this is great fun, and I love taking this when I go away anywhere. You know, you can take obviously many games on this. And battery life's pretty good. So you can plug it into USB as well to power it. It doesn't charge it, but it powers it. And obviously it has the form factor of the original Game Boy. It looks like the original Game Boy, and a lot of people are fooled into think that it is. So this is a really inexpensive way of getting yourself some really cool hardware. And this, I would say, is a much better option than the option I spoke about in one of the previous options, which is to go out and buy one of those consoles that has 30,000 games on, that's like 30 quid from China. I think this is a much better option. You're much more in control of what's on here, and you know, you can be very deliberate about what games you're putting on, and ensuring that you're sort of ethically sourcing your games and the licensing that goes with them. So really good option. So that's the Raspberry Pi 5, or the custom hardware option. Definitely a favourite of mine. Let's see what's next. Okay, so at number 3 in my not a countdown list of best ways to get yourself retro gaming in 2024 is online. Now that's a really weird thing to say, right? Actually, what I mean by this is playing games through your browser. Now, some of you may already be aware of this being a thing. For any of you that have seen my previous Dizzy video, there's a really great example of some games that work really well online. Ultimately, what it is quite simple. You can go to various websites. So, as I mentioned with Dizzy, there's yokefolk.com, for instance, where you can go and play the Dizzy games in a browser legitimately, little sort of DOS box emulation actually inside your browser window, and then boots up the game. So it's a really quick and easy way of playing, and it's completely free. So that's a really good option. Abandonware itself, again, as I mentioned about about the sort of general legal logistics of that. If we put that to one side for a second, there are a lot of games on there, especially some of the DOS-based games, same sort of setup where you can actually just load the games in the browser. So you don't even need to download them to your local PC. You can just play them in your browser, which is really great fun. So that's it really for that option. I'll put a couple of links into the description, so you can go and find some of those Dizzy games that I mentioned before. But this is a really quick and easy way of getting started, and you can just go and have a look out on the web and do a bit of a hunt, and you may find the game that you're looking for is just playable in the browser. Don't need to install an emulator, don't need to download it, don't need any custom hardware. You'll just be good to go. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, so next up is online subscriptions. So this is probably something, or maybe something that you already have. You may already have Xbox Live, PSN, Nintendo Online, and you may already know that there are some older games that you can play on there, but you may not necessarily have had a good old look. The back catalogue of games on these services is increasing massively. And so there is, a lot of the games that you might be looking for worth having a look to see if they're available in your online subscription. You may not have thought to look there, or you may not have looked there. PSN has significantly improved over the last couple of years with Premium. You get access to a lot of older games, and a lot of them you can stream as well without needing to download them. Just this week I was playing the original Final Fantasy VII on PSN. The downside of this is I started playing Final Fantasy VII on PSN only to discover that in 6 days' time it's going to be going away. On Nintendo, I quite like Nintendo's implementation of this. You can play pretty much all of the old Nintendo consoles up to the N64, some of their handhelds as well, so Game Boy for instance, but you can play SNES, and also Mega Drive. So who would have known 25 years ago that you'd be playing Mega Drive games on a Nintendo console? That was just completely unheard of. The other nice thing I like about Nintendo Online is that you can also buy extra peripherals. So I've recently picked up one of these. You can only do this if you're a member of the Nintendo Online community. I picked this up for about £40. This is, for those of you who can tell, this is N64 controller. It's a wireless controller for the Nintendo Switch, which is really good. GoldenEye is available on there, and N64 controller is the only way to play GoldenEye. So yeah, you can buy NES and SNES controllers on there as well, and other bits and pieces which are sort of exclusive for members. Xbox Live, as for those of you who have it will know that it has a long history of having lots of sort of older games on there, retro games, that kind of thing, and lots of sort of reimagined versions of retro games, or sort of 8-bit stylized modern games as well, although I'm not such a big fan of those. Yeah, so getting an online subscription is definitely the way to go. I happen to have all three, and that's not a boast. It's more that I have a son who has a PC, so he has Xbox Live. I have another son who has Nintendo, so we have Nintendo Online, and I have a PlayStation 5, so I have the PlayStation 1. But it does give a lot of flexibility and a lot of back catalogue of games for you to go back and revisit. So yeah, if you're thinking about a very quick and easy way of getting in there, you don't mind spending a few pounds to do it. That's more than a few pounds, I would admit. But online subscriptions is definitely a way to go. So welcome to number 1 in my not countdown. Now obviously at the beginning I said this wasn't a countdown of my favourites, but here's the thing. Number 1 in this list is my favourite thing to do when it comes to retro gaming, and that is to get yourself down to a retro arcade. You may not think there's one near you, but it's definitely worth going and having a look on the web. There are more of them around than you think. They are becoming incredibly fashionable, and a really great way to spend a few hours just gaming. I've been to a chain once. I went to one in Birmingham called NQ64. It's really good. They have some really good games in there. They also have Laser Quest in there, but you can only take kids. You can't take kids into those ones. It's over 18s. So some of the more independent ones are going to be a better option if you want to take your kids there, or if you've got nieces or nephews, or you go with your friends and they've got kids, whatever it happens to be. I think it's really good getting the kids down there. My kids really enjoy playing at the one near us. We have a fantastic retro arcade in Worcester called Retroids. They have one of only 2 Outrun cabinets that has the original moving seat in it, which is something in the 90s I went on a pilgrimage to go and find. I didn't succeed, I might add, because they are quite rare, but they are an absolute joy to play. They have other retro games there. They've got Track and Field, they've got an old version of Mario Kart, they've got some shooting games, all sorts of things in there. In the evening it becomes a bar, so you can go down there with your friends, have a drink, play on some of these old retro games. They have a pinball league as well, so they've got a load of pinball machines there, and it's just fantastic. You know, like, there is something to be said for going and actually experiencing, especially arcade games, kind of how nature intended. I love retro gaming. I love having my little Picade device on the bar. I love doing all of that stuff, tinkering with the Raspberry Pi, playing with some of the retro technology, having the old consoles, all of the things that we've spoken about in this video. But for me, the best way of experiencing retro games is to go out and play them in an arcade. They are just, it's just brilliant. So if you happen to live near me, if you happen to live in Worcestershire somewhere, get yourself into Worcester and go and play at Retroids. They haven't paid me for this plug, I just love it there, I'm going to say it anyway. But there are loads of places around the country, all over the place, where you can go and play these retro games in a retro arcade. So yeah, that is my number one option. So there you go. Those are my 10 options on how to get playing retro games in 2024. I hope that was really useful. I will be doing some more videos off the back of this to kind of get you started with Raspberry Pi, and I will also be talking about that PlayStation 3 mod at some point in the future as well, on how you can get your PlayStation 3 playing PS2 and PS1 games as well. But there is lots of guidance out there on the web, so you don't need to necessarily wait for me. But yeah, I hope you found that really useful. Next one, we will be getting right back into game reviews. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Until the next time, enjoy your retro gaming, and I'll see you soon.